Welcome to the Perfectly Preserved podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Gomes.
And I'm Anna Cash.
Here we come together to bring you a podcast all about preserving food safely, easily, and dare I say perfectly at home.
We are master food preservers, moms, wives, and we love talking about canning.
Ready to can like a master preserver? Let's get into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of the Perfectly Preserved podcast. I'm Jenny and I'm here with my co-host Anna, and we are here to talk all things apricots. And when Anna and I were planning this episode, we got so excited. We have so many things to share, best practices for freezing, canning, pureeing, acidifying, keeping that beautiful golden color. And if you love this episode, be sure to tune in next week because we're going to have an episode devoted specifically to apricot jams and jellies, barbecue sauce recipe ideas, how to dehydrate, get them gummy soft. Stick around. We have so many great apricot specific tips and tricks for you. And if you haven't left us a review, please take a second and go to that purple podcast icon and leave us a review. It really helps the show grow. Anna and I both have resources available to help you on your canning journey. Go to smarthomecanning.com. Anna has video courses that are very affordably priced, and it'll be like Anna is in your kitchen with you. I offer my cookbook, the Pressure Canning Cookbook, and it's available anywhere books are available, at an independent bookstore or on Amazon. Anna and I are so grateful that you're here for another season of Perfectly Preserved. Anna is arguably an apricot queen. She has more apricots growing where she lives than I do. It's definitely a quintessential Anna specialty. Anna, tell us all the things about apricots.
I'm really lucky where I live here in northern Utah, in Ogden, Utah. There are so many apricot trees that go unpicked. I feel a little bit sad that some people don't have that experience, especially canners. I have people that comment on Instagram all across the country that are like, oh, can you ship me some apricots? And I'm like, I love you, but the answer is no. It's so much work. Just today, I dropped off 115 pounds of apricots to our local food bank. This weekend, we were picking here in North Ogden and got about 6 crates, and it feels so good to donate to the food bank. That just tells you how much readily available apricots there are in my area. So I know a little bit about apricots. When we first moved to Ogden in 2009, in our front yard was this gorgeous apricot tree. And it was really my foray into canning. When you have a really mature apricot tree, it will produce like you cannot believe. Apricots are a little bit different. They are a stone fruit and they rarely take a year off. Like some other fruit trees, sometimes they'll have an off year, right? Like apples maybe will have an off year, or plums or whatever. But I found apricots are just pretty much full on all the time. Apricots came from China over 4,000 years ago. Today, the United States produces close to 90% of the world's apricots, most being grown in California. Here in northern Utah, I live in an area that used to be orchards. In North Ogden, there were apricot orchards, and there are still some surviving trees from there.
They really are super beautiful. When I visited Anna, I was struck by how many fruit trees there were, and specifically how many apricot trees. They were just literally in every yard. It seemed like they were just a part of every home. And being from California, I am very attuned to the fact that the state produces a lot of, well, they produce a lot of everything, but a lot of orchard crops and a lot of apricots. But
yeah,
the fact that they are in nearly every city lot, it seemed really that they were a part of everybody's yard. It was really, really common. Clearly a stone fruit tree in so many yards. It was really neat. When I was in college, I lived in the city of Chico, which is a small city at the very tip top of the Central Valley in California. And while they didn't have quite as many stone fruit, they had a ton of pomegranate trees in people's yards, some citrus trees, some other fruit trees. It was a little bit reminiscent of that. Like the city lots still retained those fruit trees. Anna is absolutely an apricot expert, and I'm excited to hear from her all the ways to save that golden, delicious flavor. If you haven't had a fresh apricot from a tree, the ones that get shipped just aren't quite as amazing. They're definitely worth seeking out at your local farmer's market, asking around who's got an apricot tree because they are delicious. The first method of preservation for apricots on our list today is freezing. So Anna, talk to us about how to freeze apricots correctly.
I can tell you what is recommended to freeze apricots correctly. I can also tell you two of the ways that I would not recommend freezing apricots. And both of those I will tell you after I tell you the right way to do it. This comes from the USU Extension website. We will have links to both of the documents that we will be talking about in the show notes. So the first is a syrup pack. You are going to make a simple syrup. You're going to take a half a cup of syrup into your freezer bag. It's going to have the addition of 3/4 teaspoon ascorbic acid per quart. That helps with keeping your apricots bright orange. If you've ever had apricots sit out in the sun, or maybe you froze them whole and then you are thawing them out, they have a tendency to go brown really quickly. And so that ascorbic acid really helps keep that beautiful yellow color. So you're going to ladle a half a cup of syrup into freezer containers, or I use freezer bags. Make sure that it's cooled. You don't want to put any hot, simple syrup into a plastic bag. Once you put the syrup in there with your apricots, kind of gently shake the fruit around so that that liquid can coat and cover your apricots. You're going to seal, label, and freeze those. I do them in freezer bags, but you can also do them in freezer containers. The second way to freeze them is to do what's called a sugar pack. So you thoroughly mix 2/3 cup sugar and 1/4 teaspoon ascorbic acid and set that aside. Pit your fruit. The great thing about apricots is you don't have to peel them like you do peaches. They aren't fuzzy. So you just pit your peeled fruit, and you can slice it if you want, but then you sprinkle that sugar mixture over it and gently toss the fruit with the sugar and allow that to sit for about 10 minutes or until the sugar dissolves. You will pack into freezer containers. The third way is to puree it. So you're going to put your apricots in your blender with 2 tablespoons of sugar and 1/4 teaspoon of ascorbic acid. I've also used lemon juice with a good success for the puree. And then you're going to puree that in your food processor or blender. You're going to want to leave a 1/2 inch headspace when you put it into your freezer container. They recommend putting a piece of freezer wrap over the puree to prevent discoloration. And then you seal, label, and freeze. So those are the 3 ways that they recommend. And I'm just going to share with you the 2 ways that messed me up. So last year was my first year having an upright freezer, and I was trying to pack a ton of apricot puree in there. I just think I did not add enough lemon juice because when I took it out, it just all turned brown. And it was so sad because you spend all this time picking apricots and pureeing, and it's a long process. And then I also did the same this year. I was in Alaska at the start of apricot season, and I was worried that I wasn't going to be able to get any apricots. So I commissioned my little niece to pick apricots, and I would pay her, split the apricots, and then put them in a bowl with water and lemon juice, and then put them in freezer bags. And what I found as these apricots started to defrost is that they all turned brown as well. Not all of it, but it changed the color of the jam that I was making to a darker brown. And when people purchase jams, they want to see like a bright orange color, and these just did not have that. I've got to figure out some way to fix that. I don't know if it's putting it on the stove while it's frozen and quickly heating it, or I don't know. I need to troubleshoot this. But Jenny, have you ever tried doing this with apricots, like freezing them?
No, but I think all the times I've made apricot into jam, I have used brown sugar. We're going to mention a recipe in the next episode, but there's a great recipe we saw that includes plums, and that would be another darker colored fruit. So if I were in your shoes, it's different because I'm not creating jam to sell the way you are, but I might just lean into the color change and go brown sugar. I think brown sugar and apricot go together really great, and they're delicious. I might use those that got frozen this way and try a recipe that has a little bit of darker color to it anyway. That's probably what I would do.
I also find that when I make jams and I put in the vanilla bean paste, it turns a little bit brown, but just things that I think about because I just want people to eat with their eyes first, you know. They're used to seeing like a bright apricot jam.
Right. And that's so interesting you say that about the vanilla, because if you were to buy a commercially prepared preserve with vanilla bean, those speckles would be visible, but I just don't know how you would get the speckles without the brown tone.
I like the flavor.
Yeah, I do too. Like even vanilla ice cream, if you think about it, it's bright white with speckles. I wonder how they do that. It's not
That's
critically
true.
important.
That's totally true.
But if you are creating jam with the goal to sell it and you want it to be beautiful, that's a thing to think about. But we digress.
We're going to move on to the second part, which is canning.
Apricots are naturally high in acid. They are a fruit that you can preserve in a variety of recipes using your water bath or steam canner. We have a ton of beginner-friendly episodes in season 1 that explain in detail the difference between water bath canning and steam canning. Both are safe, tested, reliable methods of preservation for high acid recipes, which would be apricot recipes. Water bath canning your apricots is actually pretty simple, and they are a fruit that works up pretty easily. Like the pits come out pretty easily. I would definitely classify an apricot as a beginner friendly preserve. As Anna mentioned, you don't have to peel them, even though they are a little fuzzy to the touch. They're not very fuzzy the way peaches are, or the way peaches can be. So that's really helpful, so you don't have to go through the step of peeling. They're not they don't naturally have a lot of pectin, which I think I'll let Anna speak to. So we did do some reading on how best to get your jams and jellies to set up. Water bath canning apricots is also possible for making conserves, which are like a jam and nut combination. And next episode, we'll share some great recipes for apricot conserve. There's lots of great ways that you can water bath can. Actually, Anna, maybe this would be a good time for you to mention how you just canned the apricots and then later made the jam. Is that correct?
Yeah, that'll be in our next section under puree.
Okay, great.
That's definitely one way that I utilize apricots for later in the season when I'm canning apricots. I think I've done a hot pack. There's two ways you can do a hot pack or a raw pack, and that just means that you're letting the apricots sit in your simple syrup and maybe cook a little bit, 5-10 minutes to kind of release some of that air out of the apricot and absorb that liquid. But I have one little trick that Bucky's grandpa used to make canned apricot halves. He would put a slice of an orange in the bottom, and it would not only preserve the color, but it also would give it an additional bright flavor.
One slice of an orange?
It's everything that we're talking about, right? Like it's got that citric acid in the orange, and it's just a beautiful little touch.
There you go. There's the gold of the whole episode. A slice of orange at the bottom, and then just water bath canning the rest. That's such a fantastic idea. I've never heard of that, but that is an easy, accessible, affordable home run win of a way to water bath can. That's a great idea. For our listeners, as a refresher, a hot pack is for apricots. You would have the fruit in boiling syrup, juice, or water, and then you would ladle them into hot jars. And then a raw pack would be filling your warm jars with raw fruit, cut side down, then add the hot juice, hot water, or hot syrup. And I mentioned juice as the canning liquid. You can use fruit juice. I can't say I've ever done this with apricots. Have you done this, Anna?
I've never used a fruit juice in canned apricots. I've always only done simple syrup, but I think it would taste good.
I think the decision is always like, am I going to spend the money on the juice? But I think it could be really cool. You know, you're spending on the sugar to make the simple syrup. So in that way, if you're just buying a jug of juice, it would be a little bit faster than assembling the sugar and the water to make the simple syrup. But it probably would have to depend for me personally on the price of the juice and how much you needed to make your syrup or to make your canning liquid. But that is definitely something you'll see in lots of canning literature for water bath canning, is using a fruit syrup and a fruit dip for dehydrating, or a liquid to dip your dehydrating fruit in before you dehydrate it. It's a very common recommendation, and I think if you had juice on hand that was a good flavor, that was affordable, I would say try that all day long because it can add a really fun flavor, add naturally occurring vitamin C, and be an easy flavor boost.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of just water
Yeah.
bath canning, I think there's so many good sets of directions available on cooperative extension websites and the National Center for Home Food Preservation with apricots. You could find good directions on either of those websites for sure.
I would add one thing. If you're doing canned apricots and you're doing a hot pack, sometimes you're left over with some of that simple syrup that the apricots have, but also has a little bit of that apricot flavor. I've taken that simple syrup and added it to club soda to make a fizzy drink. It's really nice. I've done that with peaches as well. If you add a little bit of lemon or basil or some fresh herb, it's so delicious for a summer drink.
Do you raw pack your apricots?
It depends how firm they are. So apricots that are very firm, I will hot pack. If they're very soft, I will raw pack. Because at that point, if I'm cooking them even more, they tend to disintegrate and lose their shape. So it just depends on if my apricots are soft or hard.
I was going to ask, do you see when you're canning, let's say, halves of apricots, do they have the same trouble with siphoning that peach halves do? Sometimes do.
Yeah, I haven't noticed that as much. But explain to our listeners what is siphoning and why does it happen with peaches? Something new that they've never heard of.
Sure. When you're water bath canning, I would say the most notorious offender would be peach halves. You'll pull your jars out and it will look very visibly, very obviously that the contents inside the jar have boiled out and just created this volcanic kind of mess inside your canning pot. You'll wonder, well, are these lids going to seal? Sometimes they won't because it has siphoned so much. You'll worry about the liquid level inside the jar. It's not the worst problem, but it is certainly perplexing for a new canner, and it is kind of problematic because you end up with not enough liquid sometimes. I think one way a person can avoid having this happen with peaches and apricot halves would be to not hard boil. When some people think, which is a smart mistake to make, but they just turn the pot on as hot as it'll go and have it boiling as hard as they can for the processing time, which is completely unnecessary. A gentle boil is all you need. Boiling any harder doesn't make the temperature go up. There's no reason to do it, and it actually creates that siphoning potential. You don't have to boil like you're on a runaway train. You can just have a gentle boil to avoid that siphoning. What else can you say about siphoning, Anna?
I think that's a great point. The one thing that I heard in the Master Food Preservers class is that imagine the items in your canning jar like they're on a roller coaster. And if you are boiling them really hard and then dropping the temperature, just imagine all of that fruit coming up or that liquid. And that's when siphoning happens. It's like these massive temperature fluctuations. So if you can gently bring things up to a boil and let it sit on the stove as it cools down, or maybe have a place on your countertop out of the way of a fan or cool air coming in. That's what I found to be the most helpful to stop siphoning. Because it is common. It's not like it never happens to Jenny.
I found that if I just didn't hard boil, it eliminated most instances of siphoning. And then the other issue with peach halves for sure, and probably apricot halves, is just air gets caught. If the peach half or the apricot half is like a canoe upside down in a lake, there's that air on the underside. And if you're able to carefully, either with a chopstick or a spoon or some sort of utensil, to make sure there's no air underneath those little canoes, you want things to keep as calm as possible inside the jar. That's the only other tip that I could offer on the apricot halves and avoiding that siphoning problem.
Okay, moving on, let's talk about puree and apricot nectar. Last year I did a ton of apricot puree. That was kind of my lifesaver toward the end of apricot season. I was just exhausted and I was like, I know I want to make more jam for my Christmas market later in maybe September or October, but I'm just so burned out right now on apricots. Sometimes you just need a break. So I did an apricot puree. I would fill my blender with about 8 cups of apricot halves that had been pitted and about a half a cup of lemon juice, and blend that all up. Then you process that in your water bath canner or steam canner. It doesn't take very long, maybe 20 minutes for sea level and up to 35 minutes if you're 6,000 feet or above. That was a great way for me to extend the harvest. You can also make puree for smoothies or things like that. You could puree it for baby food. You could do all kinds with this puree.
I think that puree is one of the golden tips of this episode. We forget that we can take a step to buy us time when it comes to food preservation, and that step buys you an indefinite amount of time. You could preserve that in February, you could preserve it into next year, you could just open the jar and eat it as is. You could add a little bit to muffins, all kinds of baked things, swap out an egg. You could do a lot with that puree. You don't have to know what that is going to be just yet. You could puree them up and put them in quart jars, right?
Yep.
Easy, guys. You could do a lot or nothing with those jars of puree. You could just eat them as is, or you could end up turning them into jam. You could use them to make some other recipe that you haven't had time to get all the ingredients for. That's saving future you. You could do a lot of things.
An apricot sorbet is so good.
I feel like I'm the only person on earth who doesn't have an appliance that makes ice cream for them. And that just is reminding me how delicious that would be. That would be so fun. Yeah, there's just a lot you can do in freezer, and you can do it in those big quart jars. That'd be a good idea.
Okay, so the last item is nectar. Jenny, do you want to talk about that? Have you ever made fruit nectar?
I have
or what
not
does that
done
look like?
apricot nectar. I've done it for other stone fruits. It's just like a jam, not a jam, but a pulpy juice, I guess. For fruit nectar is like, I did it more when my kids were little and I was really making a lot of things at home, and you can add as little or as the least amount of sugar as you want. So you can be a healthy mom and add very little sugar and maybe no sugar if your fruit's sweet enough. But it's just a thin smoothie, I guess. What can you say about nectar, Anna?
Yeah, exactly. I guess the difference between a puree and a nectar is that you're going to use a food mill for a nectar, so it's going to take out some of that peel and make it
More
is like a
drinkable.
soft smoothie without the chunks.
More drinkable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did do it. I've never done it with apricot, but I have done it with I think I did like a stone fruit mix for my kids. It's when they're little and they'll just drink and eat whatever you feed them. It was really satisfying and I liked it. I haven't done it in a while, but it's a cool idea and I love food mills. It's a great method. And again, that doesn't take that long.
I have a friend that does apricot nectar and she mixes it with homemade grape juice, which I thought was a crazy combination. I haven't tried it yet, but
What color is it?
she mixes those two together.
Is this purple?
Probably brown.
It doesn't
It's
matter.
probably a gross color.
No, I'm going to say it's probably purple. Oh, that sounds
Okay.
nutritious.
Purple with chunks.
And honestly, this is not to hate on elderberry at all. Click away from this podcast if you love elderberry. But I would argue if you were going to add apricot and grape together, those are very nutritious, high vitamin C fruit. I bet you would get every bit as much of a health benefit from that nectar as you would from elderberry. I think elderberry's reported benefits are probably best proven to be high in vitamin C. I mean, that's the thing we know for sure. Elderberry has had a great PR, right? If you give your kids half a cup of that juice every morning, they'd probably be ready to go face public school germs. I'm not a doctor. But if you're like, oh man, I don't have any elderberry, I think you probably would do just as great of a job feeding your kids the nectar.
I would have to agree.
I think that's so helpful. And I think when it comes to apricots, I think the step that everyone skips is the acidifying and the anti-darkening step. If you've never preserved an apricot, they're going to turn dark quickly, and you should not skip the acidifying or anti-darkening step, where you add either you put them in a bath of lemon juice or you add the ascorbic acid, a crushed vitamin C tablet, to, as Anna said at the very beginning, to acidify them, because I think you'll be sadly disappointed in the color and the quality, the way it looks. It's too bad because apricots are such a beautiful, vibrant color if you prevent them from darkening. Think of them like an avocado in that way. They go brown pretty quick. You want to prevent that if you can. But Anna, your tip about puree is golden.
Yeah.
That is just so helpful for people to know that they can just blend it up and put it in a quart jar and think about it another time.
Well, thanks for joining us on this episode. We look forward to doing part 2 for apricots next week. So join us for that. And as always, please leave us a like, review. That helps people find us on the podcast and on YouTube. We are over there as well. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week for part 2.
That's our show. We don't want you to miss an episode, so please be sure to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful and informative, please give our show a rating and review. It only takes a few seconds and it really helps our show grow.
Follow us on social media at Smart Home Canning and at The Domestic Wildflower.
Email your preserving questions to perfectlypreservedpodcast@gmail.com and we will do our best to answer your questions on the show.
Thanks so much for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode released every week.
That's our show. We don't want you to miss an episode, so please be sure to subscribe. If you found this episode helpful and informative, please give our show a rating and review. It only takes a few seconds and it really helps our show grow.
Follow us on social media at Smart Home Canning and at The Domestic Wildflower.
Email your preserving questions to perfectlypreservedpodcast@gmail.com and we will do our best to answer your questions on the show.
Thanks so much for listening. Stay tuned for our next episode released every week.